Welcome to Variety Tech Today. It's time to do a real, in-depth, pun intended, legit 3D camera test on the Apple iPhone 15 Pro. Now, like many phones, the iPhone has multiple lenses, and it has for years. But they're just utilizing them in a different way to film 3D. There's of course a close-up lens for focusing on small objects close-up, as well as wide angle and your typical highest quality lens. And it uses those two in conjunction to make a 3D image. And we'll get into more of the implications of that later. But to start, let's demystify some of the things regarding the format that it actually is. Apple has been calling it spatial video. So there's been a lot of theorizing and perhaps wondering if it uses depth sensor to create depth maps for the video and to create something that you can look around when you're viewing the headset and all that stuff. So to cut to the chase, no. This is just a normal 3D video, as in stereo, as in left image, right image. Your brain does the rest. It's very common among new 3D devices for the makers to, for their own benefit obviously, complicate things in the consumer's mind as if this is a new version of 3D. This isn't that old 3D that nobody likes. That this is something new that we invented that you can only get here. So, to reiterate, this is normal stereoscopic video coming from this iPhone. But for actual 3D fans, that's good news. But what about the format that it records in? Well, some years ago, 3D cameras and camcorders would record in half-width side-by-side in some more affordable cameras, or in MVC, multi-view codec, like frame packed, similar to like a Blu-ray would have, or in other versions of MVC not compatible with Blu-ray, such as that ran at 30 frames a second. And in more recent years, 3D cameras such as the Red Hydrogen 1 phone and the Leia LoomPad 1 and 2, as well as the KuCam Ego, all recorded in full width, side by side, at 30 frames a second, full 1080p. Well, the interesting thing, it goes back to using a multi-view codec, but it's a next-gen version of that. This is something that can be converted on the iPhone into a usable format for editing software or for other uses, and we'll get more into that later. So again, this uses a frame-packed format that was developed years ago, but unfortunately never utilized because when 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray came out, they didn't end up including 3D in the spec, sadly. But this format supports more resolutions and frame rates, including Ultra HD 3D. That being said, the iPhone 15 Pro does not support, with its native camera app, filming in 4K 3D, and we'll get into the reasons for that later. But for now, let's take a look at some initial test footage to get an idea of the quality that you can expect. And now, recording in spatial video, which is 1080p, 30 frames a second. And now let's move into some camera test indoors. We'll see how it handles lower light. We'll start with moderate light indoors in the daytime, as well as some artificial light, and then moving on to even darker scenes at nighttime, both indoors and outdoors. So let's watch a few minutes of that and see how it handles it. And here we are indoors. Holding it at arm's length should be okay because of the interaxial. But I'm wondering how the detail is, the noise, if there is any, the level of it, and the sound too. So, a couple takeaways. First, this is a nice 3D camera to have. It delivers decent quality HD 3D video, and because of the relatively close interaxial distance between lenses, it provides usable depth on close subjects, which is arguably an important thing for common usage. However, one thing I hinted at earlier was that it's using two different types of lenses. It's sort of like a makeshift 3D. So this may even have been an afterthought to boost the usability of the Apple Vision Pro. So by using that wide-angle lens and the main lens, which is higher quality, you'll notice that it does include some noise in one of the eye views. You may also have noticed that the primary lens does shallow depth of field, depending on the subject matter and the proximity to the subject. And the non-primary lens does not do that. It's a flat focus. So you'll have that confliction between the two. And honestly, that's not always noticeable, especially the farther away the subject is. But for closer focusing, it is more noticeable. And here's a couple of focusing tests, and you can see what I mean. Take notice of each eye, and then how they look together. Now, an interesting thing is that Apple did not invent this concept of basically hacking the iPhone to make 3D video. This had already been done years ago by a stereo enthusiast. In fact, the same man that developed the most widely used 3D photography software, Stereo Photo Maker. And he also made the smartphone app for Android and iPhone called 3D Steroid Pro. And this is a great app for taking cha-cha shots, which is left-right separately of a stationary subject, aligning them and converting to multiple formats. But he also made apps for past versions of the iPhone that would enable utilizing the cameras much the same way Apple is now. One is called i3D Movie Cam, and it gives a live preview of those lenses. And since they're not end it aligns and crops them so it can be usable in 3D. The only thing is that it outputs them as two separate HD videos, 1080p, 30 frames a second. However, they are perfectly synchronized. So if you have 3D compatible video editing software, these can often be put together and rendered as a 3D video. And by the way, this also works on the iPhone 15. And there's another third-party app called Spatial Camera, which enables video recording on the iPhone 15, but with a couple extra options. For instance, 1080p at 60 frames a second, high frame rate, as well as 4K at 30 frames a second. So let's watch a couple different camera tests that compare similar shots using these different apps. In the videos that you'll watch, I'll tell you which camera app is being used, whether it's the spatial video from the official iPhone camera app, or i3D Movie Cam, which was developed years ago, or the spatial camera app, which has the different resolution and frame rate options. Okay, this is spatial video through the official Apple app. 1080p, 30 frames a second. Image stabilization. This is i3D Movie Cam Pro. This is the spatial camera app, 1080p, 60 frames per second. This is spatial camera app 4K, 30 frames a second. This is the Apple camera app, official spatial video. This is i3D Movie Cam. This is spatial camera, filming at 4K, 30 frames a second. So, let's take note of some things. First off, the official spatial video camera app is cropped more than the others, but it has great image stabilization, which is really important for any good video, but especially for 3D. Now, the spatial camera app, when filming at 1080 high frame rate, 60 frames a second, it's still also has the image stabilization, but just a little bit less, so the cropping is less. It's zoomed out a little more, so to say. And for the 4K version, that was zoomed out a little bit more to eke out more resolution. And the old i3D Movie Cam app, that was all the way cropped to 16 by 9, but zoomed out as far as possible, and with a lot of noticeable jitter because there was no stabilization. But interestingly, that i3D movie cam seemed to have better audio. It seemed to be muffled on the other apps. There's a couple things to note about the Spatial camera app, which does HFR and 4K. First off, the 4K is really only in one eye from the primary lens. So you can pause it, do frame grabs, and you'll notice that only the right eye is Ultra HD and the left eye isn't. But it doesn't look terrible. It still kind of works because your brain fuses the two and you do get the extra detail out of it, but in some shots, depending on the lighting or the level of detail, it can really give a strange contrast that doesn't mesh as well as it should. Because remember, it's cropping a wide-angle lens for the left eye to fit so that the images match. So resolution is lost. And the other problem, arguably the more important one, but still maybe a temporary one, is that Spatial camera has a bug currently when I was testing. That's the two video streams are out of sync. It may not have been easy to notice in the scenes we just saw because they're relatively still, but it looks way worse when there's movement. And hopefully that'll be fixed in an update. I don't see why it can't. I'm sure it will. So let's watch another comparison video. We'll see first an official Spatial video, and in that one take note of the shallow depth of field in the right eye and the flat focus in the left eye. And in my opinion, this was handheld, so it should be okay with that interaxial. That wasn't the problem. The problem is that the shallow depth of field was so extreme compared to the other eye that personally it was a hard watch for me. Maybe once you see it, you can't unsee it, but the focus should not be that much of a discrepancy, and that's kind of a problem for close shots. Okay, this is held at arm's length, filming with the iPhone standard Spatial video camera app. 1080p, 30 frames a second. And then in the two videos that follow, you'll see the Spatial camera app filming in both HFR and 4K. And the missynchronization between eyes is really noticeable in this one. So get your barf bag ready. Maybe shut one eye or the other. But I'm just keeping it faithful so you know what you're getting. But you'll also be able to assess the quality and see what it really could be if they fix that sync issue, which I'm sure they will. And now filming with the Spatial video app, 1080 60 frames a second. And now 4K, 30 frames a second. Now, interestingly, there was another app that some had used to hack the iPhone in the past to record in 3D. It was called Filmic Pro Double Take, and it would record from multiple cameras at once on the iPhone. And I wondered, why doesn't it allow recording from both in 4K? And also the same thing regarding i3D Movie Cam. Why not record in 4K 3D? But an interesting note from the Double Take app's website was that it said this: note, 1080p video is the maximum resolution supported by the Apple API for multicam capture. But interestingly, with Spatial camera, which we just tested, they do allow 4K, but like I said, it's only in one eye, and the left eye is scaled to match it. Now, if you wanted to see something regarding depth maps, there was an interesting app also made by the same maker of 3D Steroid, i3D Movie Cam, all those. He made a bunch of these. One of them was called i3D Depth Cam, and this captured video depth map that could be applied and to make a 3D video with past iPhones. And it's not really usable quality, but it was more of like a fun thing to see what's possible. And here's some test footage from that. Now, what about 3D still photos? Well, there's also the app i3D Photo Cam. This enables capturing left and right images at the same time at about 3000 pixel resolution. But unfortunately, at least on my iPhone, these come out as misaligned. However, there's another app called Spatialify, or maybe they want it pronounced Spatialify. Maybe that's better. I don't know. But anyway, this includes a camera function that enables you to take a side-by-side 3D photo, and it is aligned properly. So I would recommend using Spatialify for your 3D still camera app. You can also use the depth data that are automatically captured with still photos to make a 3D photo using his other app called i3D Portrait. Just bear in mind, if you use a still from the selfie camera, the depth map is automatically made. It's not going to be as good, so less usable results. But if you use the primary camera, you'll have a much more accurate depth map. Now, the algorithm that applies that depth map and converts that to 3D does have artifacts. It does result in artifacts, but it's still more or less usable in different cases. It's not as good as native 3D, but it is an interesting thing to test out. So, now a key question. How do you get these videos from your iPhone to anywhere else? Like, how do you get it into something that can be watched on your Loom pad or on your 3D television, 3D projector, for use in 3D video editing software? Well, that app I mentioned earlier that has a camera feature, Spatialify, its primary purpose, in fact, its initial purpose before they added the camera feature, was in fact to convert these videos. So you open Spatialify, you click Browse Spatial Album, you select the video that you want to convert. Now, first off, you don't have to convert it. You can watch it straight on your phone screen in different formats without any conversion, straight from the original file. And you can watch it in parallel. For instance, if you put it in parallel, put it in a VR viewer that you use with a phone, then you can watch it in 3D on a viewer instantly. Or if you want to watch it just with your own eyes, and you can't parallel view, then you can select cross-eyed and view it in 3D by crossing your eyes until the images merge, if you're familiar with how to do that. It also has anaglyph even, so if you have the red and blue 3D glasses, you can watch it in 3D right on your phone screen. But anyway, if you want to save it, you can select the share button, And you'll have options such as half side-by-side, full side-by-side, half over-under and full over-under, and anaglyph. I would recommend full side-by-side for all 1080p 3D videos. This will give you the original quality. However, there's one key thing to take note of here. You'll notice it has an option called horizontal disparity adjustment, and this by default was on, but I recommend turning that off. What this does is automatically adjust the stereo window. For instance, it'll put things at the stereo window to avoid window violations, try to make more pleasing 3D depth. Maybe this is useful for you. So you might have a use for it. You don't want to do any editing or anything like that and have something that looks fairly good. So I can understand that fully. But if you are going to import it into a video editor, definitely turn that off and keep those video files native, because this doesn't just adjust the stereo window, it also introduces artifacts on the edges of the screen from adjustment that you typically wouldn't get, and they're kind of an eyesore. I mean, it's not huge, but it's also fairly noticeable. Here's an example of past videos we already watched, but with that automatic adjustment turned on. And look at the side of the screens for, you'll see these artifacts. So, if you're converting a normal 1080p spatial video, again, what you want is, if retaining the original quality matters to you, then what you want is full side-by-side. However, if you're using the Spatial camera app to record 4K 3D, full side-by-side isn't an option. And currently, that couldn't be used anywhere anyway, whether 3D video editors like Cyberlink Power Director or 4K 3D TVs and projectors, Blu-ray players. So you'll have the option for 4K half side-by-side, but keep in mind, there's another option below that. It says uses higher resolution, and this by default was off. So when I did that, it downgraded the 4K to a half-width 1080p video. So if you're doing 4K, again, check on the uses higher resolution option and half-width side-by-side. So then once you got all your settings right, you click export, and you'll see the progress bar as it's exporting. And then the options will come up to share, and you want to click Save Video. Save Video. And that will save it as a new file that's usable in all the aforementioned places. And if you have your cloud backup turned on, of course, it will automatically upload that. So this is definitely a starting point. In some ways, it's a step up over past options. It's great to have a nice quality 3D camera that you can take with you. This was finally the first time it's been available since the Red Hydrogen 1, since my phone actually broke. I dropped it, it got water damage in the snow. And besides that, it was really getting difficult to use as far as coverage because it didn't have 5G. But otherwise, it was a great phone, but I just couldn't use it on a day-to-day basis, especially using it for work. So being able to have that 3D camera on you at all times is a really nice experience again. And again, it's just a start. Going back to what we said before, this is a makeshift 3D camera. It was using a method that had already been in existence for years that feels like it was a hack, basically, to promote the Apple Vision Pro. But if that is a success, then there's the very real possibility they could make the next iPhone to be a 3D camera from the start. And that would entail having two identical primary cameras, So right now this in some ways rivals many of the quality 3D cameras that we have available. But just imagine another iPhone with two primary lenses that utilizes fully the next gen MVC codec for 4K HFR 3D. It's already built into the codec, it's future proof, with both lenses having synchronized shallow depth of field capabilities. That would be a 3D phone, that a 3D camera in general, that anybody could get behind, whether you want it as a phone or not. That would just be a great tool, and that would be unstoppable. So if they can get to that point, that would be the next big step. Are you enjoying using yours? Have you noticed any quirks or capabilities that you'd like to share? Comment below, and I'll see you next time. Bonus. That is the end of the episode, but to trail off, I'll share some extra test footage, both in HFR and in 4K. And like I mentioned, they are desynchronized, so watch at your own risk, if you will.